The North Carolina Department of Transportation is having money problems. A new report on dwindling DOT cash reserves comes after earlier this year, DOT announcing they had plans to lay off hundreds of contract and temporary workers. Transportation Secretary Jim Trogdon points to several different reasons for all of this, but state legislative leaders have questions. And so do we here at the John Locke Foundation. Joe Coletti is following the story for the Locke Foundation. He analyzes transportation and budget issues as a senior fellow. Joe, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here.
Should we be concerned about all of this?
Yeah, money problems any place in state government are a concern and should be a concern. And the Department of Transportation, the lack of a cash balance there and the dwindling cash balance, some of that is legislatively guided, but the McKinsey report that you alluded to in the introductory comments, taking a look at what's going on in the department, did point to some challenges with primary engineering and with what they called the culture of cash. And both of those are basically that there's not enough oversight of what's happening within the department to be able to make sure that the cash is being brought down in a responsible manner. So they recognize that they have to bring the money down and probably made some mistakes along the way in how quickly they did that and how they were managing projects along the way.
We're about, 4 months or so into the fiscal year, so they've got to operate for another 8 months or so and already having cash issues. Give us a sense of the amount of money we're talking about here for DOT.
Well, the department's budget is $5 billion, which is about $3 billion, $4 billion from the state, and $1 billion from the federal government. And along the way, they also bring in, they also have bonds and some other borrowing that they do to make sure that they can maintain the cash levels. And that is divided between the Highway Trust Fund, which is mainly for construction, and the Highway Fund, which is mainly for operations and maintenance. And then it gets weird because the federal money goes into the Highway Fund, even though that's for construction of new roads. And so that's where some of the confusion when taking a look at things starts to come in as well, because in one of the bond issuances, the department said that they were loaning $1 billion from the Highway Trust Fund to the Highway Fund. But that was part of this cash drawdown so that they could reach, so that they could bring in the federal funds. The federal funds are only provided to the state after the state spends money. And because the federal funds go through the Highway Fund, if we're going to do construction on federally related roads, then the money can't be in the Highway Trust Fund, which is only state roads. It has to be in the Highway Fund. So you loan $1 billion from the Highway Trust Fund to the Highway Fund, spend that money, and then the federal government eventually sends that $1 billion back. So all of this is really confusing, kind of like who's on first, but it's what's going on. It's the nature of how the department is funded, and there are a lot of other confusing things with how the budget works there, but that part is kind of almost straightforward, but.
Is the legislature going to somehow give them money to make sure that they operate? And we should say that Secretary Jim Trogdon has pointed to several different things. He's pointed to bad weather, having to put out more money than they anticipated, apparently to repair roads and things associated with hurricanes and major storms. Also, there's been some talk about maybe estimates on some projects weren't up to par, that the costs came in higher than they thought. And then they, meaning we at DOT, have to pay out to people who are considered, quote, victims of the state's MAP Act, which has been declared unconstitutional. Those folks are going to get compensation. I bring all that up, Joe, just to say this. Shouldn't have leadership at DOT been able to at least anticipate some of this?
They did anticipate some of that. That's part of the cash drawdown that they were doing. The challenge, I think, comes in with the estimates of projects that the Secretary mentioned, and with the just general cash management that they had there. And so how much of the lack of reserves is unanticipated seems to be about about half of that, about $400 million potentially, based on the McKinsey numbers. And so that's the concern. The MAP Act is a long-term challenge for the department because estimates have been between $300 million and $1 billion of liability that the state has to owners who have had their property who have been compensated less than what they should have been to make way for roads and other projects in the Department of Transportation. And then the hurricane relief and the storms and the extra response that's had to be with salt in the winter and just the rebuilding of things after hurricanes and slides that's part of that. It's higher than it's normally been, but it should be within the range of what is possible. So the ability for the department to continue it shouldn't be an issue because that's the cash balance, and money is still coming in through the normal revenue streams of the gas tax and sales taxes on cars and the other pieces that go into what the department normally has. So they are still receiving money. It's just that the cash balance is coming dangerously close to what the minimum that they have to have.
Well, speaking of receiving money and the gas tax, et cetera, not only do state lawmakers and leadership at DOT have to deal with the current issue and what's happening, but going forward, there are some big-time questions, Joe, that you've been analyzing and writing about at johnlocke.org about what we do when we're in a situation where we're not going to have enough money coming in to build and repair. So give us a sense of what we face here in North Carolina.
Well, we have both at the state level and at the national level, there is a greater demand for road construction and road maintenance and operations than there is money available. Because in part because part of that may be that we've overbuilt, and part of that is that as cars have become more efficient and as we move to more electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, the gas tax becomes a challenge for most places. The federal highway tax and or the federal gas tax funds the Federal Highway Trust Fund, and then the state relies for the greatest portion of its transportation money on the gas tax as well. And so if we're moving more to electric vehicles, then that becomes a less reliable source of funding.
Are we looking at potentially needing to propose and get buy-in on more toll roads, or maybe technology that vehicle miles traveled, something like that?
Those are both options that both at the federal and state level are being considered. Should we have more toll roads? Should the federal government allow more tolling on interstates? Vehicle miles traveled as opposed to the gas tax. And then one of the other options could be more local control of roads, because North Carolina has more state roads than any other state except Texas, but we also have a higher portion of roads that are owned by the state than than just about any place else. And so if we had more local control of the funding and the construction, then the local governments would be able to have a say in what roads we have and where they go.
That's going to be fascinating going forward, because everything that you've talked about there would be much more visible to people who would have to pay the toll or the vehicle miles traveled tax, versus you go pump a gallon of gas and it's just part of what you pay. You don't really know what part is tax, and so that's going to be fascinating.
It becomes more visible, and it becomes harder to collect on the other side.
Joe Coletti is writing about all of these issues at johnlocke.org. Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you.